He said, I'm the God of my own universe. I said, I'm glad to hear about that, son, because I'm going to shoot you in 5 minutes. He said, you can't do that. I said, oh, yeah, I can. You see, I'm the God of my own universe. And I decided it's fine for me to shoot you. Question, exactly how do we tell right from wrong? In the first couple of seminar tapes, we talked about a variety of topics like the Big Bang Theory, how it's a big dud. We talked about the Garden of Eden. And we talked about why the earth cannot be billions of years old, and why did the people live to be 900 years old before the big flood came. We talked about dinosaurs, and students are being lied to about dinosaurs. They did not live millions of years ago. And on tape number 4, we talk about a whole bunch of lies in the textbooks. Now here we're going to talk about what's happened in the last 150 years since evolution became a popular theory. What on earth is happening? And what you can do about it. We'll get to that eventually. We're going to review some of what we covered on tape number 4, some of the lies in the textbooks, and then go on into how it carries into some practical steps we can take. What do you do about it? We covered in the last sessions how that James Hutton wrote a book in 1795, and he said the earth is millions of years old. Now during the late 1700s, most folks believed the Bible, and most folks thought the earth was about 6,000 years old, because if you add up the dates in the Bible, you're going to get about 6,000, 4,000 BC, not millions. So James Hutton came along and caused people to doubt the earth was 6,000 years old. Then his book had a very strong influence on a lawyer from Scotland named Charles Lyell. Charles Lyell wrote a book in 1830. And in his book, he developed what we call today the geologic column. Cenozoic, Mesozoic, Paleozoic, and maybe you saw the movie Jurassic Park, named after the Jurassic layer. This whole thing was made up by Charles Lyell in 1830. And the geologic column does not exist any place in the world, except in the textbooks. It's pure imagination. It doesn't exist. But all of evolution theory is based on that dumb geologic column, made up in 1830. This fellow said, I myself have little doubt that in England it was the long-age uniformitarian geology and the theory of evolution that changed us from a Christian to a pagan nation. He's right about that. And England is a pagan nation. And folks, I don't know if America ever was a Christian country or not, but it's not now. That's right. We are a pagan nation also. What has happened? Charles Lyell's book had a very strong influence on a young preacher named Charles Darwin. Darwin graduated from Bible college to be a preacher. In 1859, after 22 years of writing, Darwin finally published his book, The Origin of Species. We'll get into more of that later, the real title to the book. Darwin's philosophy was strongly influenced by people like Charles Lyell, people like Thomas Malthus. Malthus had written a book that said, there are more babies born than can possibly survive. So it's best if the weakest die off. That greatly influenced people like Charles Dickens when he wrote the Christmas Carol. Remember the scene in there where Scrooge said, well, if he's going to die, let him die then, and decrease the surplus population. Remember that line in there? I don't think you can understand the Christmas Carol, the history behind that, until you understand how evolution ties in. James Hutton's book made people doubt the earth was 6,000 years old. Along came Charlie Lyell, and people began to doubt the flood. Because instead of the flood making all those layers, they said, oh, maybe each layer is a different age. And then along came Charlie Darwin, and people began to doubt the Creator. And so by the mid-1800s, the Western world, at least, was left in a bad situation. They said, well, if there's no God, who's in charge? Well, it must be us. This led directly to the rise of humanism. Humanism is the teaching that there is no God, so we must be God. We make the rules. We decide what's right and wrong. For the next 50 years, after Darwin's book came out, many isms arose in the world. Marxism, Nazism, communism. These things, communism would have been just a footnote in a history book if it hadn't been for evolution coming along at the right time. We never would have heard of communism, most of us wouldn't, if it hadn't been for Charles Darwin coming along and giving justification to that dumb idea of communism. Hoyle said, I'm haunted by a conviction that the nihilistic philosophy, which so-called educated opinion chose to adopt following the publication of The Origin of Species, committed mankind to a course of automatic self-destruction. A doomsday was then set ticking. I agree, Fred. Once you start believing there's no God and we're in charge, then we're in trouble. Right. There was a Russian atheist astronomer came to America one time, and he spoke at one of the universities, and he said, now folks, either there is a God or there isn't. I thought, boy, this guy's brilliant. But then he said, both possibilities are frightening. I thought, wow, that is brilliant. You see, if there is a God, we better find out who He is and find out what He wants and do what He says. Amen. If there is no God, we're in trouble. Because we're hurtling through space at 66,000 miles an hour and nobody's in charge. Pretty scary thought. Charles Darwin said, "Often a cold shudder has run through me as I have asked myself whether I may have devoted myself to a fantasy." Well, Charlie, you did devote yourself to a fantasy. If you believe you came from a rock 4.6 billion years ago, you need help. You were designed for a purpose. Now, what is it? There are 4 great questions that every single religion in the world tries to answer. Even atheism, which is a religion, you have to believe there is no God. There's no way to know that. The 4 great questions every religion tries to answer: who am I? Where did I come from? Why am I here? And where am I going when I die? The way you answer these questions depends upon how you view the world. There are basically only 2 ways to look at this world. One view says, you know, there's incredible design. There must be a designer. That's the creationist worldview. Other people look at the world and say, you know, nobody made it. It just made itself. They don't believe God created the heaven and the earth. They think a big bang made this world from nothing. That's called the humanist worldview. It just made itself. The first plank in the Humanist Manifesto, 1933, was the universe is self-created, self-existing, and not created. That's the first thing they have to agree to be a humanist. There's now been Humanist Manifesto 2 in 1973 and Humanist Manifesto 3 in the year 2000. They have to declare what they believe. Humanism is a religion. You have to believe there is no God. So why is this theory dangerous? Evolution, I am convinced after studying this now for 30-some years, evolution is absolutely the foundation for communism, Marxism, Nazism, socialism, racism. We'll get into some more of that in a minute. Number one, I think evolution is dangerous because it's bad science based on lies. There is no scientific evidence to back up this evolution theory. We've been offering $250,000 for a long time at our ministry for somebody who could give us some real scientific evidence for evolution. It is funny, brother, to see the people try to turn stuff in. One guy said, I've got proof for evolution. I said, really, what do you have? He said, well, I'm working in the laboratory right now, and we have developed soybean plants that are resistant to frost. I said, man, that's good. That'll really be handy. I said, what did you start with? He said, well, soybeans.